Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Today, inshallah, we'll begin our survey of the plant kingdom. Part 1 of the topic will be the seedless non-vascular plants. These are the most basic plant, evolutionary speaking. If you recall from our prior discussions, we had divided the plant kingdom into 3 broad categories. The first distinction that we made were the plants that produced seeds and the plants that were seedless. Among the seedless plants, we had subdivided the category into non-vascular and vascular. In part 1, we shall talk about the seedless non-vascular plants, or the most basic of plants. If you also recall from a prior discussion, in these plants, the most basic of plants, it was the Gametophyte generation that dominated. Specifically, we shall talk about mosses, hornworts, and liverworts. So the seedless non-vascular plants, the 3 categories that we shall study, are the bryophyta, the mosses, the Antisera, the hornworts, and the hepatica, or the liverworts. Their common names are the mosses, hornworts, and liverworts. Mosses most people are familiar with. Hornworts are so called because they have little tiny horn-like things. The liverworts are so called because their leafy structure looks kind of like, in somebody's imagination, liver. The official name of the mosses are the bryophyta. The official name of the hornworts is the Antisera. It takes a little bit of practice to say that one, trust me. And the official name of the liverworts is called the hepatica, hepatica referring to liver, as in hepatitis. Now, as stated before, non-vascular plants, it is the Gametophyte generation that dominates. In other words, the majority of the plant is the Gametophyte generation. So here's the Gametophyte generation. The majority of this plant is Gametophyte. The majority of this plant is the Gametophyte. Now, if you look at the moss, for example, if you look at this carpet of moss, the majority of the plant is the Gametophyte, and occasionally you see the stalks of the sporophyte. So the bryophyta, or the mosses, these are non-vascular plants. They're tiny because they're non-vascular. They're dependent on diffusion osmosis for the minerals and water, respectively. So they don't grow very tall. Mosses are usually less than 5 centimeters tall. And if you look at the leafy structures, they're very thin, 1 to 2 cell layers thick. There's some adaptations of these plants. They typically grow in carpets of hundreds of plants. Each plant is a little tiny thing that you see over here. They're often pioneer species in a particular area. And again, it is the Gametophyte generation that dominates, and the sporophyte generation occasionally stalks up like that. There are many new terms, I'm sure, for you, as they were for me when I first studied this. But there's some basic terms that we need to know. The rhizoids are little root-like things. They basically anchor the plant. The thallus is the actual part of the plant. Occasionally, as I stated, there are stalks, and on top of these stalks, you'll see the spore-producing machinery, the spore capsule. So these are some basic terms associated with the moss as a plant. Now, to understand the life cycle of mosses and these plants, it helps to remember the alternation of generation, which we talked about before. Remember, plants alternate between 2 generations. The Gametophyte generation, which produces gametes, the sperm and eggs, which as they fuse, they produce the zygote, which is diploid. And it is the zygote that gives rise to the sporophyte generation. Some part of that sporophyte generation specializes into these specialized structures which produce spores which are haploid. And it is these spores that give rise to the next Gametophyte generation. So you will see this come again and again in our discussions of plant life cycles. And I found this one very nice illustration of this. Their copyright request is that we look at their video from the HTML address. So that's what we're going to do. Watch, it's really cool. Now, first thing I want to bring to your attention before we start the video is that even though all these stalks look the same to you and me, but they're actually 2 different stalks. There's a male Gametophyte stalk and there's a female Gametophyte stalk.
A moss, like all other plants, undergoes a complex life cycle in which the generations alternate between haploid and diploid forms. The most familiar form of the moss is the leafy haploid form, called the gametophyte. Gametophytes are either male or female. The male gametophyte produces male gametes, sperm, inside reproductive structures called antheridia. The haploid gametophyte produces these haploid sperm by mitosis. The female gametophyte produces a female gamete or egg inside each of many female reproductive structures called archegonia. Like the sperm, the eggs are haploid and are produced by mitosis. The sexual reproduction of a moss requires water, which is one reason mosses are typically found in moist environments. Sperm cells require water for transport to egg cells. Once in the vicinity of an egg, a sperm cell swims to the egg and fertilizes the egg by fusing with it. The fusion produces a diploid zygote, the first cell of the next generation, called the Sporophyte generation. The zygote divides by mitosis and grows into a multicellular sporophyte. During the life of the sporophyte, it remains attached to the gametophyte and depends on the gametophyte for water and nutrients. As the sporophyte continues to grow and elongate, the surrounding gametophyte tissue keeps pace, but eventually cracks at its middle. The remaining hood-like tissue at the tip, called the calyptra, protects the growing sporophyte. Underneath the calyptra grows a sporangium filled with thousands of spores. The spores are haploid and are produced when diploid cells of the sporophyte undergo meiosis. When the top of the sporangium is shed, it reveals a ring of teeth-like structures holding in the spores. These teeth are highly responsive to humidity. They arch in and then out again as they absorb water and then dry out. Each time the teeth open out, the spores are released to the wind. A spore that lands on moist ground will germinate, producing a filamentous elongating structure called a protonema. This protonema gives rise to buds, which in turn develop into the next haploid gametophyte generation. The gametophytes in this generation will mate and continue the alternation of generations.
Now, these are the simplest of plants. If you're like me, I thought, my God, I thought these were simple. But nevertheless, here's a life cycle in a drawing. As I stated before, even though these leafy structures look similar to us, but they're actually different. There's a male leafy thingy and there's a female leafy thingy. There's a male gametophyte and then there's a female gametophyte. The male and female gametophyte are different. On top of these structures are the egg-producing things and the sperm-producing things. So archegonia is the female structure that produces the egg, and the antheridia is the male gametophyte structure which produces the sperms. And these sperms, just like human sperm, have little flagella. With the help of a raindrop, those sperms travel to the egg and fertilization occur. Now, fertilization occurs in the female gametophyte structure. So the zygote remains in the archegonium. And the zygote then sprouts out into those things that we see. So it is in the female gametophytes that you see these stalk-like thingies, the sporophytes. And then inside these sporophytes, the spore-producing structures, this diploid, what used to be the zygote, this diploid structure undergoes meiosis, creates genetic variation, and creates different types of spores. Some of these are male, and some of these are female. And these spores, as they're dispersed around, they land on the ground, and they produce male and female gametophytes, depending on their genetics. And then the cycle begins again. There's a special type of moss that merits mention, and that is the Chardon. It typically grows in these peat bogs. Peat bogs are like old decaying plant matter and is very rich organically. So this type of moss typically grows in peat bogs. So dried peat moss, which is commonly known as the peat moss, is added to soil by farmers and planters because it absorbs and retains water. So you'll probably see this in friendly neighborhood plant store. So that was the first category, the bryophyte, the mosses. The hornworts and liverworts, the life cycles, we're not going to study in detail because it's very similar. Now the hornworts, the Antisera, they're small talus plants. They're so named because the sporophyte of a hornwort resembles the horn of an animal. And this tall structure, the horn, is in fact the sporophyte of this plant. It is the Gametophyte generation, again, that dominates, that carpets the land. So here are some hornworts. Okay, the last category, of course, is the hepatica phyta, or the liverworts. The term wort apparently just means herb. There are two types of liverworts, thallus and leafy. Thallus liverworts are what you see over here. They have this flat leaf-like things. And leafy liverworts have more like leaf-looking like leaves. In the liverworts, you'll see these cup-shaped things. These are called the gemma cup or gemma cup. In the gemma cups are little tiny gemmas. And this is the asexual reproduction of the liverwort. Each gemma may start a new plant. Just like the mosses, the liverworts also have rhizoids and it is the leafy thallus that gives this plant its name, the liverwort. Now, sexual reproduction in the liverworts is very similar to the mosses. There's this little female stalk and there's a male stalk, and the male stalk produces sperms and the female stalk produces the egg. So the female gametophyte produces the eggs, which are stored in the archegonium, and the male gametophyte, which looks like this, the antheridium, and it produces the sperm. Now you have to remember, these are tiny plants. This whole thing could probably be covered by a few drops of rain. When it does rain, however, the sperm travel again to the egg, fertilize, and give rise to a new generation. This is an example of a leafy liverwort. The leaves of a leafy liverwort are arranged in 3 rows. That was a brief survey of the non-vascular seedless plants, the most basic of plants. Next time, inshallah, we'll talk about the seedless yet vascular plants. The great representative of this category of plants are the ferns. Until next time, as-salatu was-salamu ala rasulillah walhamdulillahi rabbil alamin. Assalamu alaikum.